对话知名作者，品味精彩人生。欢迎收看本期图灵访谈，我是主持人劳佳。我们今天非常荣幸地请到了我们的新书《一个定理的诞生》的作者 Cédric Villani 教授。维拉尼教授是法国著名数学家，也是2010年菲尔兹奖得主。大家知道，菲尔兹奖堪称数学界的诺贝尔奖，并且只颁发给40岁以下的数学家。今天就让我们一起来了解一下维拉尼教授和这本书背后的故事。Welcome, Professor Villani. We're so much honored to have you here today.
Thank you.
We know that you have written this book, Le Théorème Vivant, and to tell a story about a discovery of a theorem which leads to you winning the Fields Medal. So now this book has been translated into Chinese and actually have received a grand applause from all our readers. So as the publisher of this Chinese edition, we would love to have our readers, or maybe our potential readers, or even just math lovers, to know you better. So maybe could you, in layman's term, explain a little bit what your work is about?
As a mathematician, I have been working on various parts of mathematical analysis, which is the art of finely exploring certain structures and certain problems. And my main specialty is in mathematical physics, namely the study of gas and plasma, or these crowds of particles which have each their simple properties at individual level, that of a molecule, for instance, but then complicated, rich properties coming from the fact that there are many of them in interaction. And over the years I have been involved as a specialist of mathematical entropy, which is a notion of disorder inside a crowd of particles, and in various ways in which this is connected to problems of probability, gas theory, plasma physics, galactic dynamics, geometry, and so on.
So you have worked in all these many fields.
Many fields, but all connected.
All connected.
All connected. And in this particular problem that I am describing in the Théorème Vivant, it is about understanding the long-time properties of a plasma. Plasma is a simple concept. You take a bunch of electrons, so tiny particles with negative charge, and they all interact, repelling each other, and you ask what happens if there is an electric field that is imposed on the plasma. How will it evolve in time? Now, gas theory, classical gas theory, tells us that when the molecules collide, it leads to some special stability property, which is very convenient and very common. But now in plasma there are no shocks between the electrons, and in spite of that, it is believed and observed in many situations that there is some stability. If you try to perturb it with a little bit of electric field, it will spontaneously relax to some equilibrium. Physicists have been working on this phenomena for now, I think, 70 years. But together with my former student Clément Mouot, we worked on mathematical understanding on this, with a lot of rigor, and understanding what we can deduce, what we can see about the way that a gas is governed, that a plasma is governed by the mathematical equations.
Okay, so I think it's quite unusual for a mathematician to write such a book and tell his own story. So what has inspired you to write this book?
What is unusual is indeed the fact that it is focused on the story, as you say, not on the result. And In the book, I don't try to explain what the theorem is about. I don't try to explain exactly why it is important, but I explain how we proved it. All that is behind the scenes, many attempts, the adventure, like detective story. I like to compare the work of mathematician to the work of the detective, trying to solve the riddle. And when you read a detective story, you're not interested in knowing really who is the guilty man and why he did this and how, etc. What is of interest for you is the adventure of finding out, the inquiry. Detective is looking, etc. And will he find or not? And here is the same principle. Will the mathematicians find the theorem or not? So it's mathematics told as a mystery story. And indeed it is quite unusual. I believe it's the only book writing mathematics in this light, Right. And I wrote it because some editor asked me this question, we'd like to write a book with you, we'd like to be part of the world, but I don't really care about the math. What I'm interested in is, what do you do with your days? What is there that you are doing in your mathematician's work, mathematician's life? So the book is an answer to the question. So it's very unusual because it focuses on the life of the mathematicians. Mathematicians talking with the other mathematicians, mathematicians fighting with the problem, wrestling with it, mathematicians traveling. So it's focused on the human side rather than on the mathematics itself.
So how long does it actually took you to write this book?
Writing the book it's hard to say. It's hard to say because you know when you start, when you finish, but in between I had to do many things apart from writing the book.
Absolutely.
The book was written partly on my laptop, on my knees on the subway and so on. But anyway, I tell you, it was much faster than to prove the theorem.
So you enjoy writing on literature even better than writing like a paper or a thesis?
It's a different emotion. It was writing for like literary is a pleasure, and really you feel that it's part of the deep human nature of telling stories. So it's something that goes on like naturally. There is not the same kind of suffering that you always have in the scientific research. But both are good. Both are good and pleasant and complementary aspects.
Okay. So we see this book in somehow like a diary. Each chapter is like a diary. You have a place, a date, and tells a great amount of details. I mean, the amount of details is just amazing. You have all these dialogues and with all these depictions. So how do you manage to do that? Do you keep a diary by just like every day, or you just remember everything?
We live in a computer era, and to reconstruct the chronology, most of it was based on my old emails. So I was going through maybe thousands of emails to reconstruct when I was doing this, how I was doing that, etc. Also, let us say that I believe we mathematicians have a particularly good memory of conversations. Places not so good. I'm not sure where I was, but conversation is so important in our life that we remember very well what we said at what moment, etc.
So, I mean, this book is intended not really for mathematicians, but for the general public to understand your work.
Let me even say that it has been proven more difficult to read for the mathematicians than for the general public.
Because to try to understand.
Yeah, because the mathematicians try to understand really the details, while the details are here, to put the atmosphere, to put it very realistic, but not to be understood. So all the details are there to form a kind of impressionist picture, like all the atmosphere. But if you're a mathematician, say, oh, I need to understand this, it spoils the pleasure of reading.
Okay. So we see that you actually wrote quite a bit for popular science. And we know, we even notice you have a new book coming out. So why do you think it's so important to write popular science books, especially when you have so much research work to do?
It's not only research that I have to do. I am a director of institute, president of association, member of a number of scientific boards, president of some scientific boards, so doing everything. But still, the amount of requests from the society is so enormously large that I am sure it is not wasted time to do this. Each time I was involved in large-scale, broad audience project about mathematics, I found that people were extremely demanding for that, and they ask for more. They want to read about math, they want to understand about math, and this is because they are really keen on understanding what is going on and transforming our world nowadays, not to be left aside. Society is still being transformed at very fast rate by the rise of technologies.
Absolutely.
Mutations in this country, by the way, maybe more than in any other country, given the speed at which the economy is changing here. And technology plays such an important role. People want to understand what is the evolution, and mathematics plays a more and more important role. So they want to get more familiar with it, and not just understand the math, but understand who does the math, who are these mathematicians, why they work, where they work, how they work, and so on.
Okay. So maybe we can talk a little bit about yourself. So we learned that you come from a family of scholars and artists, like both your parents teachers like literature, and
both my parents were literature teachers, yes, in high school.
And you have a uncle that is a professor of mathematics.
Not only is he a professor of mathematics, but also a great jazz piano player.
Wow. And you have a brother who is a composer.
Actually, he lives in Los Angeles now, he composes music for films.
I mean, this is amazing. So we're trying to understand what kind of influence does your family have on you, especially when you're still a child.
It's hard to say, family influences you, but you never know in which way. My house was full of books. I was reading and reading and reading. There was always this atmosphere, like studying is so important. And apart from that, I could do really what I wanted. But being in this idea that, the books and the music and so on is a permanent element of life, influences you at subconscious level.
So does your family has any specific expectation on you? Say they want you to study certain areas or certain subjects?
Well, I think my family was very keen on me to pursue some higher studies and find my way. They never gave me some specific instructions. You have to do this or that. Probably, even though they were in literature, they would rather have me doing science, maybe aware that the world was more and more dominated by science, or maybe, to diversify the skills of the family. And they had this idea that, Cédric has to look for the best. Then it was not clear. Should he stay? We were living in the south of France. My father would rather have me stay around. My mother, on the other hand, was very keen on sending me to Paris. That's the only place where you should develop. Probably both points of view are possible, but it was very important for me to have been in Paris, and there I really found my place. And, always this idea that you have to be aware of the tradition, but at the same time see for how things are going on right now, which are the hot topics and whatever. Little by little, of course, I had my own ideas, even though it always was a lot of room for the randomness. And I always tell young people in search of advice for their career, they have to find their own way. I always tell them, don't be a specialist. Or rather, when you specialize in something, then after that go to the next subject. Become a specialist also. And always be unsatisfied. And above all, leave some room to the chance.
So we see that you mentioned a lot of like art and music and poetry in your work. So does your family has a lot of like influence on that part?
Maybe. Once my mother told me, after all, you are the writer in the family, even though it was supposed to be, you are the scientist in the family. But yes, of course, at subconscious level, you become impregnated by all the atmosphere. And in subtle ways, you feel a hair of tradition. Recently, I was in Uruguay, in South America. And from Uruguay was a tradition of French Uruguayan writers. 2 or 3 of them were really great. And for instance, there was Jules Supervielle, there was Laforgue, and my father loved them a lot. And I was there contemplating the ocean and so on. And I felt, okay, it's like now I am on the steps of my father's interests, the same place where one of his favorite authors was here standing, even though my father almost never traveled. Somehow, because of his interests and what specific culture he had in mind and so on, I could feel this link.
Okay. So we would love to know, so when you first started in math, maybe in college, so we know now that you work mostly in analysis and in like mathematical physics, but when you started, do you already have a preference over like algebra or geometry?
Yes, but quite the opposite preference of now. Actually, for a long time, analysis was rather at the bottom of my list of interests in mathematics. When I was a teenager, for sure it was geometry. No question about it. And when I was a young adult, algebra was the big thing. And I had better grades in algebra and so on. But somehow later I turned out to be an analyst. And choice was made partly by chance, partly by change of interests. Anyhow, now I believe I am really an analyst at heart, but it took me some time to discover it.
Okay. So I actually read your personal website, and on there's a column which mentions some of the heroes of you. So I saw there like Ludwig Boltzmann, which of course you study on him so much. You have Maxwell, you have John Nash, you have Alan Turing, and you mentioned all of them have been very innovative in applying mathematics to another scientific field in which this has not been done before. And all of them have spent a lot of energy studying the properties of diffusion processes. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, I created my webpage back in 2003, and I tell you it was a big deal in those days. I had to write it in HTML language, and now of course you do it with all the tools which are available to create your own webpage. That's so easy. But it was a big deal, and I had thought a lot about how it should be constructed. And I wanted that there be this gallery of heroes. It was my intention to add a few of them from time to time, but in the end I stuck to the original set. And I first asked who are the ones I want to speak about, and only after the selection was made, I realized there were some connections between them. But for sure, one particularly striking thing about them was their ability to use the mathematical abstraction to make important, deep discoveries about our world. Even Boltzmann, who is the most physicist of my heroes, used real good mathematical skills to prove his so-called H theorem, the law of increase of entropy in the gases. And altogether, they have applied mathematics subjects to fields such as economy, physics, industry, whatever. But there is some unity in the mathematical methods behind, not just in the point of view, but also in the objects, in the tools. For instance, the notion of entropy was used by several of them with such important outcome. And I think they are a great exemplification of this fact, this mystery that mathematics is so effective in understanding the reality.
So it seems that you prefer kind of math that is more applied or practical over those that are, very abstract, or maybe some people call them more pure kind of mathematics. So is that really the case?
I would not put it this way. When I started, I wanted some real applied thing or applicable. But in the end, like most mathematicians, I am primarily driven by the aesthetic and the inner beauty of the field. But I find it even more inspiring when the applications are there and are important. And I find that it really, when there is this application side, it really fits into the whole of the human society and human life. Always between the idea of something beautiful and something useful. The whole of mathematics is in this movement from beautiful to useful, back and forth.
So this question is actually coming from the community. It's one of the readers on the community that raised this question. So it says that we know that your work is really on the cutting edge of the mathematics, but if we ask you to name just one mathematical concept in your work which is so important that you think maybe even a layman should know about, what would that concept be?
Without any doubt, the concept of differential equation is so important. It changed our world. Differential equation is a rather old concept, but it's from the 1600s with Newton and Leibniz, etc. Differential equation, actually, you hear about them at the very end of high school, But differential equation changed everything from the economy, the industry, we use them, live in them, and so on, predictions. So this is something one really should know about. And then entropy. It's so central, so important, related to this fundamental fact that our world is made of tiny elements, tiny molecules, and that we are macroscopic. So entropy also should be known. And in my lectures, often I talk about differential equations, I talk about entropy, even for laymen.
Okay. So if you look back all these years that you work on mathematics, what is the most exciting moment that you feel that the God has shed light on you? What would be that moment?
There are a few of them. I would not single out one, but in the book I describe a couple of them. Mm-hmm. Some moments where you have the illumination after a night of torment, or when you realize that you are able to put an end to a project on which you have worked for several years without knowing if it will succeed or not. Really, there are these. Sometimes the reward is the flash. Sometimes the reward is the completion of the thing. The completion of a big book, and when you see the book appear in print, is really an extraordinary moment. But also the moment when you realize that there is something that you will be able to push. And in the book I describe the whole process of this mathematical research. At first there is nothing. I mean, you're not even sure which is the question that you will ask. Mm-hmm. And in the end you have a whole complete set, almost 200 pages of dense mathematical scribbling that has been put together. It's a long way.
Absolutely. So I imagine that when you work, do you do like the traditional way that mathematicians that you have a pen and paper and you're just doing all those formula deductions and pages by pages? Do you still do it that way?
It's still the best way, but this is, in some sense, to us mathematicians, we would say, these are the details. This is not the important thing. The important is the strategy, whether you want to start from what you know and then expand, whether you want to input a certain method, whether you want to find a new conceptual approach, whatever. It's a strategy that counts for us more than the particular way of working.
So now there are some computer programs that can do part of these kind of labor work, like doing some of these kind of deduction or some of these calculations. Do you use any of those in your work?
I'm rather old-fashioned in this way and don't use them. Programs are good in certain fields, not yet in others. And for the moment, it has not been a revolution at all in the math. For sure, what has been a revolution is the possibility to compute numerical solutions of differential equations. It has completely changed our relation to the differential equations. But the way we do the proofs is still rather the old way. I should, to be fair, I should add that numerical simulations don't just provide answers to understand how the solution looks like. It also provides intuition. By looking at the numerical solutions, you can change your point of view on the problem. You can decide that something is important or not. But then in the end, if you want to prove the theorems, you are left basically with yourself.
So it sounds like mathematics is still part of the field that is not really ready to be taken over by computers.
When you discuss with specialists of artificial intelligence, and when you dig, in the end, that's always for them the holy grail, to do an intelligence that will be able to prove theorems. And they consider it much more important than a program that does chess or Go or whatever.
Yes. I mean, in that topic, nowadays a lot of people are kind of worried. Even some media, have this hype saying, with the rise of computers, and the rise of artificial intelligence. They're taking away our jobs. They are conquering the whole world. Do you see that kind of statement actually somehow true, or is just nonsense?
It's intermediate. It's not completely true. It's not nonsense either. Fears about artificial intelligence, are almost as old as computer science. And if you remember 2001 Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick, of course, there was this robot gone crazy and so on. It was 50 years ago almost. And these ideas come from time to time again, depending whether there is progress or no. We are in an era of progress of artificial intelligence. Still, we are far from an intelligence that would take the lead on humans so far. Maybe it will come, maybe we have to worry, but we still have time about that. About the economic issue, there is more worry. Many of our jobs may be taken by some machines which are not so intelligent, but okay and specialized to do something. Like in the medical sector, in the news sector, in many jobs related to whatever, collecting information, transforming information, etc. And it will be part, however, of larger trend, which is the worrying side of economy. But economy did not wait for robots to be worrying. Look at the state of the economy worldwide. It's been decades that the whole world is in trouble. Wow. Depending at time, it's more the West or more the East or more the other countries which are in trouble, but economics is worrying, and behind it, of course, is the big issue, which is much larger than technology, of how we share the work, how we share the wealth. These are basic issues. We see that currently there is huge concentration of wealth worldwide, including in this country. There is also concentration of work worldwide. It's crazy to see that in many places, world is divided between, society is divided between those who are dying from exhaustion of working too much, and those who are dying of not working and crying for work. It's really strange. At the same time, at world level, for a long time, the world was separated between those that had too much food and those that had not enough, and so difficult to redistribute. So it's a problem that is much deeper than technology.
That's very true. But especially in China, I'm not sure about France though. There are many students, maybe some of them like in engineering subjects. They're facing some of the problem, like when they come to the college, they study some fields, some subjects, and later on, maybe 5 years, 10 years later, most likely, some of these knowledge becomes kind of outdated, and they feel like they studied something not useful at all, and with all these technological revolution going on, many of these things usually, like it used to have to be calculated or told by humans. Now computers have all these things done. So some of these students may worry, what kind of knowledge, what kind of skill should they really acquire in the university?
First, any Nobel laureate in biology or chemistry started his career or her career by learning knowledge which later became outdated. That's the way it goes. First learn the knowledge that is outdated, and then you continue by learning the new knowledge. You cannot start directly with the new. You have to start and training your brain. And a second comment is, the more machines there are, the more there is need of people to handle the machines. So if you want to be sure to never have your job stolen by a machine, learn how to handle the machine. Know how to program, know the algorithmics, and so on. And be prepared. The most important in education is not the knowledge, it's the training.
Okay. So I know you have worked in France, you have worked in the States, you have come to China several times, and you have seen all parts of the world. So how do you see the difference between the higher education systems in all these countries? And do you see they have a different kind of impact on the students?
The most important difference, and this is the one that most people stress when they have seen these various cultures, is the nature of the relationship between master and student. Traditionally in this part of the world, enormous respect, while on the contrary, on the other side, in America, for instance, you will be encouraged to not believe in what the master says and being disrespectful in ways. Each system has advantages and drawbacks. The advantage of the Eastern point of view is it produces a lot of good students and hardworking and ready to take back the legacy and continue and deepen. The drawback is that it is difficult for these to become revolutionary in their findings, and it is striking to me, for instance, as observing the Chinese mathematicians, how the system has been very successful at producing a huge number of excellent quality researchers, but did not manage to produce some superstars in the past decades either. And by far the most famous young ethnic Chinese mathematician is Terry Tao, who is really Australian and did his studies in Australia and then in America.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's an overseas Chinese maybe is not stranger to the fact that he was so extraordinarily successful. So, one thing that you learn when you travel is that no system is perfect, and that there is always something that one has to understand to improve.
Okay. So for those students who want to be maybe a researcher later in mathematics, what do you see as the very key kind of traits or features they need to have to become successful?
In mathematics, you have to really love the subject first. Sincerely, you have to be very tenacious, always never give up before you understand. And you have to be very curious, open-minded, look for imagination and so on.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that I have. But I mean, just out of curiosity, I know you must have answered that question for thousands of times. Why have you put that spider on you there?
I knew you would ask. But that is my personal story. Let me mention that I have a number of spiders from various parts of the world. Mm-hmm. Now people offer to me. Now some of them I bought, some of them were made for me. This one, for instance, comes from Niger in Africa. Mm-hmm. The stone is cornalline and was made by a Tuareg artist. One of these big guys from the desert, all dressed in blue, who has become a friend. So each of my spiders has some story, and the reason is my story.
Okay. All right, so thank you very much, Professor Villani.
Okay.
Thank
My
you very
pleasure.
much for coming to
Okay.
this interview.
Thank you.